I got a lot off my physical TBR recently, so let's talk about everything that I read in March and April. Oh, that's heavy. Oh my gosh. Okay. It's this one. Okay. Hello, my name is Emily Crow from The Cozy Crow, and welcome to my YouTube channel. In today's video, we're going to be talking about everything that I read in the months of March and April. I've got a new baby, and so it's a little bit harder, especially to film this type of content, just because it takes a while to sit down. It's in my front room area, and I have a 5-year-old as well. So the time that I have where my husband can watch my kids, they would be in this common space. So it's a little bit tricky, hence why I missed March. I'm going to try to get through all of the books for March and April today. We'll see how many sittings this video takes because I have my newborn with me right now. So he is doing great and he's just staring at me and wondering what mom is up to. But this might have a few different time breaks and the lighting may change as a result, but my goal is to film all of this video in however many increments today. So if you're not familiar, in these types of wrap-up videos, I like to talk about all my statistics at the very beginning, just kind of things that I'm learning about my reading and sharing kind of habitually what I am reading. And then we'll jump into my book-by-book reviews where I share my star rating, what I thought of the book, who I think the book would be a good fit for, very, very mild spoilers, basically what's on the back cover of the book, and maybe a little extra about, the vibes that it's giving me, or if I liked certain characters or not, kind of thing. Without further ado, let's jump into my statistics for my reading recently. We're going to start off with the month of March, and this is March and April books from my TBR that I have up here, but we will get into that. For my March statistics, I read 16 books, which is a lot. I am very surprised by how many I read, and I don't know how long I can keep up that kind of momentum because it really just depends with taking care of kids. And I feel like April was a little bit harder of a month, but I finished a couple books that I'd been working on. So I still had quite a few. Now that I'm filming this, I don't know if May is gonna have quite as many books though. We'll have to wait and see. So 16's a lot. I read 13 audiobooks. 7 of them I got through my library through Libby, which I love. It's definitely my preferred method of getting books. I also had 1 book that I had purchased via Audible, and I have 5 books that I got as audiobook arcs, which is really, really cool. I love that they are doing more arcs on NetGalley, and I do love audiobooks, and so I've been picking up a few of those, and it's helping me branch out and read things I wouldn't normally read, but I might be interested in just to give it a try because it is a free book. I don't have to pay for it. So that's been really good for me. And I am trying to move away from Audible. I do have a couple lingering credits I need to take care of, as well as books I've already purchased, but I'm going to be transitioning from Audible to Libro FM. If you can hear my baby, he's chatting with his dinosaur toy. I'm hoping to transition to Libro FM, and so you still might hear me talk about Audible a little bit, but I would much rather support small businesses, independent bookstores, other companies that are not Amazon. So it's a work in progress, something I'm working on. I read 2 ebooks in the month of March. I read 1 that I got from Libby, and I read 1 that I had as an ARC. And I actually also had a physical book, which is exciting. I don't get through a lot of physical books because I'm exhausted and it just doesn't fit my reading habits. If you're not familiar, I do a lot of audiobooks because I can listen while I'm knitting or crocheting. I can listen while I'm doing chores. I can listen while I'm exercising. So I get through a lot of audiobooks. For ebooks, I will read those on my e-reader, and I'll read them when I'm feeding my baby. I'll read them in bed before I go to sleep. And so I get through a few more of those, but physical books don't fit in with my reading habits as well. Bless you. Let's talk about the genre breakdown of what I read in March. I read 4 general fictions, a little bit more than usual. I read 3 fantasies, 3 historical fictions, also more than usual. I read 2 romances, 2 mysteries, and 2 sci-fi or dystopian type of novels. I read a variety. I think right now I'm kind of in my sci-fi dystopian journal fiction era. this time of year. That's kind of what I am being drawn towards more. And then I like to look at when the books I read were published to see how current, how relevant my reading is. I also am looking at the classics that I'm reading, and so that is kind of captured in looking at the publication year of the books I read. I read 4 books published this year in 2026. I read 3 books published last year. In 2025, I read 6 books published in the early 2020s. I read 2 books published in the 2010s. And then my oldest book in March was published in the 1990s. I read a total of 6 arcs in the month of March. I am leaning all in to my advanced reader copies. I have a lot lingering. I think on NetGalley, I have like 25 available for feedback. So I gotta get a move on and kind of catch up a little bit, fix my feedback ratio. Though I am pretty caught up with like releases, I'm just a smidge behind on those. And then as far as goals that I have for 2026 in my reading, I'll make sure to link a video up above and down below where I talk about my reading goals for the year. In 2026, I want to read from this book called like 52 Weeks of Diverse Titles, I think is what it's called. I'll pop up a picture so you can see. But this is kind of a journal with prompts that lists 52 different books written by diverse authors that the American Academy of Librarians recommends. Wow, I do not have my details ironed out, so I'll make sure to have all the information down below. But I am trying to read approximately 1 book a month. I don't think I can get through 1 book every week. I read 1 book in March that came from this book that was recommended to me through this book. I also want to read more classics. I read 1 classic in March. I really want to read more books by BIPOC authors. I read 2 in the month of March. And then for my big goal of 26 physical books that I have in my TBR that I want to read in 2026, my 26 in 2026, if you will, I read 2 books on this list. So I need to read a little bit more than 2 books a month. I'm a little behind, but I finished a big one in April that I'll talk about in just a little bit. And then I also am tracking my net physical TBR. So all the books that I own that I haven't read yet, keeping track of how many books come into my life, how many books get off my physical TBR and onto my bookshelves or unhauled. And I have a net 0 for the month, which means I purchased as many books as I got off my physical TBR shelf, which feels really good. My goal overall for the year is to have a net negative. I want to read more of those books that I have in my closet on my shelves, and I want to make more space and not have as many things lingering. So that's the ultimate goal. My average rating for March was a smidge lower than in previous months. It was 3.98, which is still pretty good. I think I do a pretty good job at picking books that I think I will enjoy, but I'm also trying to stretch myself a little bit, and so there are some books on here that are not my favorite. Speaking of which, my lowest rating for the month of March was a 2-star. I had a 2-star read in March, which is not good. I did have a 5-star though, and I had a couple favorites for the month for sure. My longest book that I read in the month of March was Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir, and this is 476 pages. And the shortest book that I read is a novella by T. Kingfisher. This is called 9 Goblins, and apparently this was originally her adult debut, and it's been republished. So happy that it was brought to my attention when I saw it was republished so I could read it because it was a fun one. I had 0 DNFs this month. I did have 1 reread, and 3 of the books that I read are included in videos that I have either already put on my channel or will be putting out on my channel. There's all the details about the books I read in March. Let's talk about the statistics for the books I read in April, and then we'll get moving into all the individual books that I read and giving my review. And we'll get through as much as we can before I have to put my little one down for a nap. Okay, April. Like I said, I did not read quite as many books. I read 12 though, which is more than I expected, and I was able to get a really big one off my list. You can probably see it right here, but we'll get there. I read 10 audiobooks. 7 of them I got from Libby, and 3 of them were books that I got as audio arcs. Nope, that's wrong. Why did I do that? That's not true. 7 of the audiobooks I got were from Libby, from my library. 1 of them was from Audible, and 2 of them were advanced listener copies. My words are not working. And then I only read 2 other books besides those audiobooks. They were both ebooks, and they were both e-arcs that I received. Let's talk about the genres that I read in the month of April. I read 5 mysteries. I did not do this on purpose. I had a couple arcs. I also had a couple holds come in that I'd been waiting on for a really long time. I read a few mysteries in preparation for arcs that I have in my list to get to. I had to read the second book before I could read the third book, things like that. So I read 5, which is a lot. And I have lots of comparisons to draw between them. Definitely had some that I liked and some that did not hit. I read 2 romances, which both happen to be YA romances, which is not a genre I read a lot. I also read 2 general fictions in the month, and these both could be categorized as maybe like speculative fiction or very, very light sci-fi is kind of how that works in my brain. Speculative fiction, general fiction. I read 1 fantasy, I read 1 nonfiction, and I read 1 sci-fi or dystopian book. A little bit less of a spread than in March. Let's take a look at publication year. I read 5 books published in 2026. I read 3 books published in 2025, so also very recent. I read 3 books published in the 2020s, in the first half of the decade. And then I read 1 book published in the 2010s. And that was my oldest book. I unfortunately did not read any classics this month. Did not read old books, unfortunately, this month. Basically, the majority of my yearly goals fell by the wayside this month. I don't know what happened. I was just trying to survive because we are in the midst of the 4-month sleep regression, and it's lasted like 4 weeks now, and it's been a struggle. I read 4 arcs in the month of April. And like I said, my yearly goals, I didn't read any diverse titles from that 1 book. I finished 1 already in May though. It was just timing. I didn't quite finish it before the end of the month. I didn't read any BIPOC books. I didn't read any classics. I think I've just felt kind of behind on the things that I feel like I need to read, and so I haven't made time for those goals, but I really need to for the month of May to get back on track. I managed to get 3 books off of my 26 in 2026 physical TBR, which makes me so, so happy. I'm getting back on track and staying caught up with this goal. And I actually had a net -7. I got 7 books off my physical TBR, and I didn't purchase any books in the month of April, which I already have a list going of books I need to purchase that have recently come out within like the last week of April, first week of May. So I need to go to the bookstore soon. So I will be making some purchases, but overall, I have a net -7 for the month, which feels really good. My average star rating was better this month. It was 4.19 stars. My lowest was only a 3.5 stars, so not too bad. I had a few 3.5 stars, and my highest was a 4.75 star. No 5 stars this month, but I still had some good reads. The longest book that I read, I've already alluded to it, was The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. This was over 1,000 pages. 1,007 pages is what Storygraph says. Oh my goodness, this was wild. This is like a 45-hour audiobook. And so it took me like 3 months to read because it's so long. I couldn't, with all my library holds and ARC reads, I couldn't afford to just like sit down and listen to this book straight for like 2 weeks. I had to space it out, and I finally got through it in April. The shortest book that I read was System Collapse by Martha Wells, and this was 245 pages. This is a little bit longer than her novellas in the Murderbot series, but it's definitely on the shorter side of a novel. I had 0 DNFs, 0 rereads, and 0 books included in videos or vlogs that are coming up. Again, April was a little bit of a like just try to survive type of a month as far as like getting through goals that I had, unfortunately. But that's the season of life that we're in. And we've made it through talking about my statistics for the months of April and March. So next time you see me, we're gonna start talking about everything that I read in March, book by book. I'm gonna go put my son down for a nap, and we'll see if I come back to this really soon or if I come back to this later this afternoon. You can probably hear him. He's starting to fuss. It's nap time. All right, it is later in the afternoon, and my baby is actually taking a decent sized nap, so I'm hoping I can get through this last bit of filming. And we're gonna talk about everything that I read in March. And you'll see I don't have a lot of physical books that I have to grab from. Most of the books I read were not books I own. And there's a couple of them that I do want to own someday. So I have a very interesting spread of books to talk about today. The first book that I read in March is called All in Her Hands by Audrey Blake. And I was surprised that this was actually part of a series. I picked it up because I think it was Read Now, or I asked for this audiobook arc and I was gifted it. This takes place in the late 1800s and involves some midwives and an obstetric surgeon that is female, and her experience feeling like she doesn't belong with all the other surgeons and all the other doctors. She's kind of in this liminal space between midwives and surgeons right now. This is in an era where there's not a lot of trust for surgeons, but then again, doctors don't have a lot of trust for midwives, even though they've been participating in the practice of giving birth for millennia, basically, and they've learned lots of tips and tricks. This main character is trying to kind of bridge the gap between these two professions and trying to make a name for herself in the profession, trying to gain some respect, both from the people around her as well as her peers in the medical field. I will say that I had a traumatic delivery when I gave birth 4 months ago. And I almost had to put this book down because of the detail and the harrowing experiences in the obstetric setting that were shared. And even though a lot of the, I guess, more graphic details happened in ways that, like, everything worked out okay, it was still very harrowing and it was hard to read for me. I don't think I could have read this if I had read it a little bit sooner. After my birth, to be honest. And it was really hard to get through the first, I'd say like 100 or so pages of it until I kind of warm up to things a little bit and had less traumatic birthing experiences in my ears. So just an FYI, if that might be triggering for you. This definitely has a lot of medical details and was really interesting from a historical standpoint. I really loved this main character and seeing her struggles. There was a lot of things like some misogyny and things like that that just made me feel a lot of stuff. It wasn't like super cozy, cute. It definitely was intended to provoke and inspire, like a lot of historical fictions do. So I really, really loved following along in this story, even though it was a little bit more emotional than I think I was prepared for. And I found out, yeah, this is the third book in the series, so I need to go back and read some of the other books in the series about these characters because I ended up really falling in love with these characters and wanting to spend a little bit more time with them. I will say that the conflicts included in this book all seem to wrap up just a little bit too nicely by the end of this book, which wasn't my favorite. I also wasn't a particular fan of the audiobook narrator. It just felt like a lot of the like secondary and tertiary characters kind of blended together with the way they did their voice, and there was a lack of emotion in the inflections that the audiobook narrator had. Not so much so that I would like hear this audiobook narrator again and be like, ugh, I don't like this person. I don't want to listen to the audiobook narrator, but I would not necessarily recommend the audiobook for this compared to other books that I will recommend to you because I really like the audiobook. And I'm not super particular about audiobooks. I know some people have very strong opinions. I have a mild opinion that the audiobook is not the way to go for this one. I would have loved a little bit more details on the medical nature of what was happening and the historical nature of like the medical field at this time, because that's what I am interested in. But overall, I feel like this author did a really great job of helping me feel immersed in this story and this time period. The next book that I read was Atmosphere by Taylor Jenkins Reid, and I am kind of in my space era right now, though this book let me down a little bit. Not entirely. I do really like Taylor Jenkins Reid's writing style. I really loved a lot of her books, and I was really excited to pick up this new one by her. I only rated it a 4-star. I think this is my least favorite Taylor Jenkins Reid book that I've read, and I think part of that is because these characters in general were not dramatic. I think I just really like dramatic main characters. So The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, Daisy Jones and the Six, Carrie Soto is back. All of those involve really dramatic, really powerful main characters. They give off big main character energy. And even though you don't like these characters, you can't help but respect some things about them and appreciate them in their humanness. In this book, we have Joan, and then Vanessa gets roped into the story a little bit, but she's more of a secondary character. Joan is our main character, and while I really like Joan as a character, she just was a little bit boring, honestly. She did not have that big main character energy. She did not bring in the drama like some of her other books. I wasn't as entertained, I would say, and I didn't appreciate the nuance of the character as much because there was nothing wrong with her. There was no reason to not like her, I guess, if that makes sense. So it was a little bit different of an experience compared to other Taylor Jenkins Reid books that I've read. The big conflict in this book is related to Joan and Vanessa's relationship, and so that was really powerful, and I really appreciated that that was a concern in this time period. I think this is set in the 80s. They are trying to decide like if it's worth it for them to continue their relationship even when there's a lot of homophobia going on, to the point where their careers are threatened as a result. There's a lot of sexism, there's a lot of microaggressions. It all felt very realistic for the time period. I will also say that there was not enough space. This is about astronauts, but there wasn't that much space time. Unfortunately, I was looking for more space details. So I felt a little bit let down by that, but there is like a little bit of a dual timeline. We get a little glimpse of this space flight, dramatic, things are happening. But that's just like a little blip, and then we have a lot more time in the past, and then a little blip in the present, and then time in the past, and then another little blip on this spaceship, and as they're trying to figure out how to get safely home. I just wanted more space time, I guess. And then the ending of this book wrapped up so quickly. This main conflict of the spaceship trying to get back home after facing some catastrophe and what that would look like. I found it very interesting. I really liked that, but the pacing just wasn't quite it for me. It happened too quickly. It happened too close to the end of the story. I wanted a little bit more of the after effect of that circumstance and where Joan and Vanessa's relationship ended up as a result of that circumstance as well. We were just kind of missing some of those details. The book ended a bit abruptly and a bit too quickly. If you've seen some of the vlogs on my channel, you'll see that I recently did a Book and Yarn Box vlog about How to Age Disgracefully by Clare Pooley. And this book was included in a mystery book box from Mulberry Fiber Co. that is no longer dying yarn, which is really sad because I have a big pile of book boxes that I've been meaning to get to because I've wanted to film them. I'm probably still going to film them because I think they're fun as a way to highlight the small businesses that Bethany selected for the box. It's fun to see what yarn looks like that's inspired by the book, and it's fun to have a mystery book and to read it because I have read a lot of books that I wouldn't normally pick up as a result of doing these book boxes. So I'm still probably going to film them. I just need to figure out how to make that happen. This book I rated a 4.25 star. This is a general fiction that involves a motley crew of people that are connected by their local community center. There is a threat of the community center being torn down to make room for something else by the city. And so they are banding together to try to raise money, to try to raise awareness so that they can keep this community center, so that one of the characters can keep her job, so that this senior club can keep their friends, so that a troubled teen in the area can have a safe space to go and a safe daycare for his daughter. And so you see this group get together in this kind of absurd manner to try to solve the problem of this community center being torn down soon. I think that every single one of these characters was really interesting, but we only got maybe like half of these characters in a perspective, and I really didn't like that balance. I feel like all the characters that didn't get perspectives could have been just as interesting as a perspective. But also, I really, really loved one perspective. That was Daphne's perspective. I loved seeing her growth and how she interacted. She was kind of like the glue that held this group together, and you got to see her grow as she tried to reach beyond herself and build a community because she was a lone wolf. I really, really loved her character. So I'm kind of split between whether I wanted every single one of the perspectives shared because I feel like a couple of them deserve to be shared and weren't, or having just Daphne's perspective because she was really the foundation of the story. This definitely felt a little bit absurd, but in a realistic way. Like you could totally see all of those absurd things happening, even if it wasn't likely that they would all happen at once. But nothing was so totally beyond the realm of possible that it just felt like a silly, goofy time. It wasn't like a Finley Donovan type of story where it was absolutely wild that she got roped into the mafia, but there was a little bit of absurdity and chaos surrounding these characters and their efforts to save the community center. I really disliked Lydia as a character. She recently got a job at the community center and she was overseeing this senior group. She was a doormat of a character and she was so frustrating because she's like, well, my husband cheated on me and it's my fault. I was just so frustrated with her character, how much her head was in the sand the whole book. And then she finally had like a moment of change and growth and it was like a complete 180. And I also hated that because it wasn't a realistic character arc for her. She didn't have a gradual change. She didn't have like this dawning of realization. It was just a flipped switch. Everything about Lydia's character was not for me. I think that you would enjoy this book if you like a general fiction, found family, some elderly British humor, and just seeing these characters come together. I think in general, this is a nice book that most people would enjoy to some extent. The next book that I read was from my 52 diverse titles book as like a recommendation for me. And this is Exit West by Mohsin Hamid. And this book, it says it's a magical realism. It's a very interesting space because this book takes place in a nebulous country that is war-torn And you see for the first half of the book the effects of this violence on the people living in this country, on a couple people in particular, as they have a growing romance and relationship and where that kind of takes them. And then for the second half of this book, you see a little bit of this magical realism where they can go through a door to escape that situation and go to a different part of the world. But there are political implications for making that choice and what that does for the character and the relationship and the struggles that they go through. So I found this book was really beautifully written from like a prose standpoint. I really loved the discussion on various topics that are very pertinent right now with refugees and political violence, privilege, class, all sorts of discussions like that. I really appreciated those parts of this story. The relationship itself, we are kind of held at arm's length from these characters, and it was a little hard to connect with them and connect with their choices. And you kind of see this relationship, how it grows and then how it kind of slowly falls apart. And I find myself not quite sure like the purpose of this book. It was shorter, which I really, really liked. I have more thinking to do about it. I think maybe if I read it with someone else or discussed it in like a literature class or something, I might be able to wrap my brain a little bit more around it and its purpose. Though I honestly don't really know how I feel about the magical realism. I feel like that didn't necessarily contribute to the story, but I feel like the magical realism element was still well written. It wasn't like a get out of jail free pass type of thing. It just made it hard to care about the characters because we were held at arm's length. It was hard to care about the relationship, and I think that has something to say about the characters themselves and how they had a hard time caring about the relationship in an emotional way too. But while I understand that this is a powerful book, in some ways, my enjoyment level was like a 3.75. That has nothing on the next book though, that I rated 2 stars. I really didn't like this next book. This is Call It What You Want by Alissa DeRogatis. And this is part of the Swift Reads book club. Last year, Yarnistas Fibers released yarn that was inspired by books that had been inspired by Taylor Swift songs. So this is one of them. I'm trying to read through all of them, and then I'm gonna make a blanket with all of these yarns. They are really, really beautiful together. So I'm really excited to do that, and I have a pattern picked out and everything. So I just gotta get through these books. This is not really a romance. It's very toxic and it's very frustrating to read. There are 2 college students that have the same major, communications, I think, and they have an instant attraction. There's a push and pull, and they are in this like on again, off again situationship for years, over and over and over again. And it's very painful to read about. It's like watching your own college roommate make horrible choices, and then you're yelling at them like, you need to get away from this guy, like he is not good for you. And then your roommate says, yeah, I know. And then she goes hangs out with him the next day. Like, it was so frustrating to read about. And I felt like there was no growth with any of these characters in their relationship. It was just such a long and tedious way to see these characters learn from this failing relationship because they were on again, off again, over and over and over again. And while I feel like in general, the characters didn't feel cringy, they felt realistic as college students at the beginning of the story, and as they aged up a little bit, I feel like the general like interactions between the characters didn't feel cringy, but these characters didn't have any personality besides alcoholism and obsession with their toxic situationship. And that was all we got for like years. Like this wasn't just a like partying in college thing. It was like a you are drinking multiple bottles of wine every night kind of thing. It was like not good. There's so much toxicity in this book, and I don't feel like the author was trying to promote any of that, but it made it very tiresome to read. It was an interesting premise to think about the situation that these characters were in and how they learned through them, but I don't really know why the author wanted to write a story like this, because it wasn't fun to read about. Baby's awake. We'll come back to this. Back at it again. Baby's sitting up right here and watching mama, hopefully happily. Yeah, hopefully happily. We'll see how many sessions it takes to film this entire video. But let's talk about my next read for the month of March. This was a favorite for sure. Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir, and I'm obsessed. Oh my goodness. If you have read the book, if you've seen the movie, I want to talk with you down below. I recently came out with a vlog where I read the book for the first time because it was on my physical TBR. I watched the movie because it had just recently come out in March, and I knit a project with yarn inspired by the book. And it was so fun. I had a blast with every part of this vlog, and I really, really loved this book. I'm gonna try not to talk a ton about this because I do have a vlog about this. I rated this a 4.75 star. It was almost a perfect book. If you're not familiar with this story, Rylan Grace is a middle school science teacher. He got a PhD in biology, looking at organisms that might potentially not be water-based. And he gets roped in with all these other science experts who are noticing that the sun's output, the sun's energy output is decreasing steadily. And they are worried that something is consuming that energy. They find these, really? Okay, my husband has rescued me from baby duty, which is great. I don't know how much of his babbling you could hear as I was trying to record the last couple minutes. Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. I love this book, definitely a favorite for the month. I rated this a 4.75 star, and it was almost perfect, almost perfect. We'll get to that. If you're not familiar with this story, Rylan Grace is a middle school science teacher, and he is roped in with these other science experts in trying to figure out why the sun's output is decreasing steadily over time. And even if that's only like 1%, that still has catastrophic implications for ecosystems and for humankind. Mass extinction level scenario. And his expertise from his PhD is potentially helpful for this. And he and these scientists try to figure out what's going on. You enter the story seeing Grace on a spaceship, and he doesn't remember anything. He doesn't remember why he's there. So you follow his amnesia journey as he is trying to remember what placed him on the ship and what his task is, and how he can gain data from the planetary system Tau Ceti that he is in order to help planet Earth to combat whatever is eating away at the sun's energy. This book is the perfect blend of like hard science with high stakes. It's almost like a scientific thriller. It kind of felt a little bit like a Jurassic Park type of vibe, but then also cheesy middle school science teacher. It was plucky. It had some funny and witty moments, and it was just really heartwarming to see him and his relationships and a specific character that he meets along his journey and where that relationship goes. Just very heartwarming. So it had like a really interesting blend of like serious and cozy vibes. And I feel like everything about this book were things that I like in my reading, and seeing it combined so well in one book just made it a great book that I had so much fun reading. I could not put it down. The one thing, I didn't love the ending, I didn't hate it, but I wanted something a little bit more somber and not quite so like perfect happy ending type of story. It wasn't bad by any means, it just wasn't my favorite. And I don't have my book because I've already lent it out to someone because I want them to read it, and library holds are taking forever. So I lent my book out. So that's why I just have a picture here, but I do have my own copy, and I want to talk about all things Project Hail Mary. So you can sound off in the comments if you also really love this book. We'll follow that book up with a classic that I also loved, but very different vibes. And I bought this special edition that I first saw at my local bookstore and have been wanting to pick up. And I just wanted to make sure I listened to the book first from my library before I bought the book to make sure I loved it. And I love it. Look at this really cool edition of I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Harpman. I rated this a 5-star. And I would say Project Hail Mary was maybe my favorite book because I had the most fun with it. Even though I rated this slightly higher, I just feel like from like a literary dystopian classic standpoint, this was such a well-written book. It was meaningful, it was somber, it was introspective. It gave me questions that it didn't answer, but it didn't feel frustrating. It felt purposeful that I didn't get answers. I thought a lot about womanhood, about culture, about change and moving forward. While I wanted answers, it left me wanting in a good way. This book follows a group of women who live in a bunker. There are guards over them. Their lives are very small. Suddenly, an alarm goes off, the door is left open, and they get to escape. And you get to see the decades after that circumstance and where they take their lives from there, what they do with their time. And there's so much introspection to be had, so many questions. I would love to know more about what's going on, but the tone of this is such that even not knowing everything is still very meaningful. It's so hard to put it into words, but I really love this book and I kind of want to read it again immediately, and I want to talk to people who have read this book. It says that this version has been translated by Ross Schwartz. This is also a pretty book. I also appreciated that while some of those topics I just mentioned sound like they will incite feminine rage, this book did not, which was good because I do not need any more reasons to feel angry right now. So I really appreciated that it still addressed some of those topics but didn't make me feel angry about it. The next book that I read was another arc, and it was an audiobook arc that I listened to, and this is Recipe for Joy by Monica Comas. And this book was totally not on my radar, but I was intrigued by the cover, read the description, and thought I would ask for it because I was interested in reading it. I rated this a 4.25 star. This book follows Belle, our main character, who is struggling with low self-esteem, with feeling purposeless, having recently lost her job, losing her grandma, facing estrangement from her sister. She's got all sorts of like personal problems going on, and you follow her as she is facing the possibility for a brighter future in the midst of all this grief and chaos and trying to find herself even as like a 40-year-old woman. The mechanism that she does this is by remaking recipes from her grandmother. So both she and her sister are sent these recipes and they make them to kind of connect with each other, to connect with their grandmother who has recently passed, and hopefully mend that relationship that they have. I wish that the theme of these recipes and cooking was a little bit stronger in the first half of the book when we get to know the grandma a little bit more, but for the second half and for the plot of them trying to come together and grow closer to each other and to their grandma in memory, it was strong in that sense. There were a bunch of recipes actually at the end of this book, which is really nice. So I tried to record them so that I could go back and hopefully try a couple things. So that was really fun to be able to have those recipes. And some of them sound actually really, really good that I want to try, like homemade stuffing, things like that. Belle as a character is not likable. And it was kind of tedious to read about someone who was so emotionally stunted, who had such struggles with her self-esteem and her self-worth when she is like 40 years old. That was kind of hard to read about, and it was hard to sympathize with her struggles when she didn't really give other people grace, when she passed a lot of judgments towards others around her as a reflection of how she felt about herself, honestly. This character was complex and interesting, but I didn't particularly like them. I think the author did a really good job at writing this character. I also feel like the audiobook narrator did a really great job at portraying this character. I was very impressed with how they really captured the character's voice. I feel like some of the interactions Belle had with other characters, different words of wisdom from her grandma or from other elderly people in her community, felt a little bit scripted and not very realistic. But overall, I really liked the meaning of this book and the journey that Belle goes on. Even if I didn't like her character, I appreciated her nuance. This book is a great look at grief and finding oneself and is definitely heartwarming. This next book that I read was 9 Goblins by T. Kingfisher. This was her adult debut that originally came out 10 years ago, and it was very recently republished. Compared to other more recent T. Kingfisher books that I've read, this one was a little bit more cute and quirky and a little bit less of the gothic vibes with horror sprinkled in. Though we did still get some moments of actual horror, which was interesting. I thought that the characters were distinct. I really was intrigued by the world building. I love getting to know the elf sings to trees and this little band of goblin misfits and how they interacted with one another. I would have loved a longer story with more depth to it because the plot just felt pretty linear as far as A to B to C to D kind of. I would have loved a little bit more expansion on this story and this concept. The next book that I read was actually supposed to be part of a book club that my friends do, but I didn't get this library hold till after that book club meeting. Oops. I tried my best, but this is Trust by Hernan Diaz, and this book is comprised of 4 different perspectives that tell the same story, with the caveat that because they're different perspectives, you have different narrators. And so who is telling the truth? Which depiction is more accurate? But it's set in the 1920s, financial boon. There's a family who is making bank right now, and you are looking at the husband who is a financial connoisseur, and the wife who is a lover of music, and she is maybe a little eclectic, but then she falls ill and she ends up passing away. So there's like a fictionalized, like a novel retelling. There is a first person, like journal entries from the man in this relationship. There's also a memoir written by an author that he speaks with, and then there's also the perspective of the memoir writer herself. It's really interesting to see how this same story is told in various different ways. It was kind of hard to follow though because of how it was written, and there wasn't really a good introduction to what the author was trying to do. It was a little confusing, though I found the stories interesting. They were a little bit finance heavy from like a topic standpoint, or conceptually a little bit complicated from a finance standpoint, but not too much so, but enough that like as someone who's not obsessed with finance, I wasn't particularly drawn in to the story. I really loved getting to know these characters and the different iterations of these characters and trying to wonder which perspectives we were hearing from and which were more accurate, and how different people's perspectives shaped the perspectives and the narrations that they told of this story. So that was a really interesting concept. I did really like that. I just wish there was something tying everything all together a little bit better. I rated this a 4-star. I wish I'd known a little bit more going into the story, kind of how it was laid out, because it was kind of confusing at the beginning. The next book that I read was another audiobook arc, and this is Dragons, Heist, and Other Retirement Plans by Meg Pennerson. I rated this a 3.5 star. I thought that this would be like a nice, cozy fantasy type of a read, something fun and plucky with some elderly characters revisiting an old heist that they were never able to appropriately attempt. And I will say that is a pretty good first impression of this story. I love the audiobook narrator, and I definitely feel like that is the way to go. The writing style of this author I enjoyed, but I did feel like the two main female characters blended together kind of personality-wise and even dialogue-wise. And so having the audiobook narrator really keep the voices distinct helped so much to know what was going on with these two characters. These two best friends tried to complete a heist. It was like their biggest break, their last hurrah before they were going to stop stealing things and repurposing them Robin Hood style. And when they get to their final destination, someone is there accessing the vault in their place. So they do not get a chance to collect what they came there for. But now, decades later, they have the opportunity to revisit that heist and complete it again and use the funds from that heist to help out the nuns that they were originally trying to serve with their heist. They end up running into the person that foiled their heist that's apparently a huge fan of theirs. There are magical creatures in here. I just felt like the setting of this book was not strong at all. Other than a couple random mentions of magic or like a mystical creature, this book felt like it was written in modern times with a modern retirement home, with a modern pub. Like, it did not feel like I was in a different fantasy world. And I'm sure that that is part of the author's method of writing this story, but it didn't really suit me. I wanted to get immersed in a fantasy world, and I did not feel immersed at all. I also feel like the middle of the story dragged on quite a bit, and it would have been nicer to have a shorter book with a tighter plot, especially in the middle, since there was a lack of urgency, even though they were on a time crunch for committing this heist again. This is, in general, a cozy and funny fantasy story, so I think that in general people would enjoy this, but I don't see myself reading more in this series unless I happen to come across it and I don't have anything else to read in the meantime. I will say there is no romance, which is amazing. It kind of feels hard to find a cozy fantasy without romance nowadays, so that is a plus. Another arc that I read so many arcs. I've been reading lots of arcs. I have more to go. I have a lot in my queue. This is The Name Game by Beth O'Leary. I read a book or two of hers in the past, but it's been a while. I recognize the name, and I thought that this was an intriguing premise. So 2 Charlie Joneses come to this obscure island. It's a made-up island. I looked it up. The setting was beautiful. I was like, oh, I want to go to this island. It's not a real island. Two people, both named Charlie Jones, come to this island with a letter telling them that they received a position at a local like farmhand type store, community store. There's only budget for one Charlie Jones. So where did this mix up happen? So they are kind of proving their worth in this role and trying to make this business enough money to fund both of their positions, or at the very least to fund one position and for them to be the selected Charlie Jones. So you get to see these two characters as they try to help out this business, as they try to navigate this complex relationship between the two of them, because they're like kind of competing for the same job as they're both trying to redefine themselves. I will say, there is a twist. And things just get a little bit too chaotic and kind of hard to follow along on what's happening. It almost made me want to start over from the beginning and read the story again, because it did get kind of confusing for probably like 20 pages. And in retrospect, I feel like the two Charlie Joneses that we're talking about on the Isle of Ormer were just a bit underdeveloped, because we get two past perspectives and we get two present perspectives. And so it's just spread a little bit thin. And especially with the twist that happens, it feels like I don't know these characters well enough. The first half of this book was definitely a little bit slow, because there's a mystery alluded to. Like, why are there two Charlie Joneses on this island seeking after the same job? And then also with jumping into the past, kind of figuring out how those past characters came to be on the island in the present. So it's kind of interesting from a mystery standpoint and how like obfuscated the details are. I rated this a 4.25 star. Like I said, some of it ended up being confusing, but my brain got over it. It was just a little hard to wrap my brain around. So it was very interesting. I just needed more details of these characters to feel really convinced of their relationship. This one was a reread, actually. I read it so long ago that I didn't even clock that it was an Emily Henry book until I got reacquainted with Emily Henry when I read Book Lovers a few years later. This is People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry, and I rated this on this reread a 4.75 star. This is a good book, a really fun romance. I just had read it so long ago that I really wanted to revisit it before I put it up on my shelf with my other Emily Henry books. I really love Poppy and Alex. I love their banter. I love their relationship. There's such a stark contrast between these two characters that it's really fun to be able to see how their relationship grows and how they still fit together well, even though they are such different characters. I love having the flashbacks to different summers and different experiences that they had, as well as flashing back to the present and the struggles that they're having, where Poppy is trying to fix their friendship because that's the last time that she really felt happy, was just spending time with Alex. And of course, it's a romance. They get together, there are feelings involved, they have a history kind of, and it's really fun exploring that with them, and yet it feels very realistic. It's really easy to feel convinced that the characters made good choices along the way, and that they also deserve a second chance, that they didn't squander the opportunity that they had in the first place. There is some miscommunication, not my favorite, but it wasn't played off super poorly either, so that's why it's not a perfect book. But this is up there. This is one of my favorite Emily Henrys, I think. Emily Henrys. Okay, off the top of my head, favorites. Book Lovers is number 1. Number 2 is Happy Place. Number 3 might be Beach Read, or it might be People We Meet on Vacation. I think that's how I would rank it right now. I should reread Book Lovers though, because that was my favorite. I'm going to talk about the first book in a series, and you're going to hear me talk about the second and the third book also in this video. This is The Antique Hunter's Guide to Murder by C.L. Miller, and these were read now on NetGalley, and I scooped them all up. Kind of wish I'd only grabbed one to try it out, because I'd wanted to try reading this series. I had noticed them before, but I hadn't gotten around to it, because if I had read the first book, I don't think I would have read the second and third if I hadn't committed already through NetGalley to read them. That was on me, but now I've read all 3, and I don't think I'm going to continue in the series. They're just not for me, but they were all right. This first book I rated 3.25 stars. You're getting to know Freya and Carol as they have kind of inherited the antique hunter business from Arthur, who is a friend of Carol's, so they are peers. And Arthur is a father figure to Freya, and they are taking over this business, and Arthur has left behind some clues alluding to his murder because he has died unexpectedly. And so they are trying to figure out what clues are in his journal, what really happened with both his death, but also with a past experience in Cairo, I think, where something happened while Freya was employed by Arthur, and that was like her last excursion as an antique hunter before she left the business. And by antique hunter, I mean like looking for antiques, artifacts, meaningful pieces of history, kind of, and they're hunting those. But apparently the black market for antiques can get kind of criminal. Hence Arthur's murder. The premise is really interesting, but I found the story was really slow to get into. I appreciated that there was a lot of details about the artifacts, about the antiques, but sometimes I got a little bit bogged down in the details because there was so much of that, and yet the plot wasn't really moving forward. I feel like these main characters don't feel particularly skilled or entertaining even in their efforts to solve this mystery, and so it was kind of tedious to read about. Though for the second half of this book, it definitely felt like there was some momentum in the mystery and in their finding clues. There was some momentum in learning more about these antiques, and it just got more interesting. So I was looking forward to that momentum from the second half of the book leading into the second book, which I would agree has happened, and we'll get to that in a little bit. I did like the secondary characters, and it was kind of an interesting cast of characters as they all gathered on this estate to kind of see how things shook out with a friend of Arthur's who had also recently died and was leaving things to people in his will. But overall, as far as being a compelling mystery, this book was pretty average, I would say. I finished one book in between the first and second book from the Antique Hunters series, and this is The Enchanted Greenhouse by Sarah Beth Durst. I really loved the spell shop by this author in this world, and I have been approved to read Sea of Charms, which is the third book, and that is coming out later this year, I think August or September. And so I really wanted to catch up and read the second book so I could be ready to read the third book. I did not like this as much as the first book. I found it all right though. I still in general enjoyed it. I rated this a 4-star. I thought that this book would be about Kaz, the spider plant, who has been enchanted and is sentient. I thought that we would get to see his beginnings being created by a sorceress in the library, living his life in the library, getting exiled. Like, I thought we would see all that. That was like a blip in the whole story. We really get to see the sorceress, and we hear about her poor decision making in creating this sentient plant. She gets turned into a statue to kind of remind all the other librarians to not do magic that they're not allowed to do. And then she wakes up and finds herself on an island to find that she's been smuggled out of the library because someone on that island needs a sorceress or a sorcerer to help the gardens run, because some of the magic in these gardens is going haywire. She's not actually a sorceress, so she can't really help, but now she's on the island and she wants to try and figure it out. Because she's a librarian, so she's going to do some research and look through the notes and journals of the previous sorcerer to try and fix these greenhouses that are kind of running amok. I found it a little bit hard to get emotionally invested in these plants. We have a couple harrowing circumstances of a greenhouse is actively failing and getting so cold. The frost is killing these plants in like moments. So they're trying really hard to rescue the plants from the greenhouse. And it was just hard to care because it was hard to be emotionally invested in those plants. Unfortunately, no matter how sentient they were, I had a hard time feeling connected to them. I loved the magic of these greenhouses. I loved the variety of spells that were talked about in maintaining these greenhouses. I loved the variety of the magic types that were showcased in these greenhouses. And I found it really interesting hearing about the mystery of why are these greenhouses failing and how can we fix them. I thought that was really interesting to follow along with. I didn't particularly care for this librarian sorceress character, Trulu. As a character, she wasn't my favorite protagonist. I feel like she lacked awareness. She was kind of annoying. personally. I feel like the relationship that Turlu and Yarrow had was very insta-lovey, and there was even like a tongue-in-cheek moment where she's like, do you just like me because I'm the only other person here on this island? And like, that was exactly the thought that I had. So I just didn't quite connect with their relationship, though I thought that they were very sweet towards each other, and it was very cozy and comforting, and how they learned how to work with and respect one another in their efforts to fix the greenhouses. It was very sweet. The last book that I read in March was The Antique Hunter's Death on the... Oh my gosh, words. The Antique Hunter's Death on the Red Sea by C.L. Miller. And I only rated this a 3-star. I felt like it was less well written than the first book. I do feel like in general, the plot and the storyline had better pacing, was more interesting, had more action than the first book. But I feel like a lot of the details were really left undone. There were many secondary characters that all sounded exactly the same. Rich white people who wanted to buy antiques off the black market. They were all identical. It was so hard to differentiate between them all. And it was really frustrating seeing Freya and Carol on this cruise ship, kind of, it felt like by happenstance, and they really didn't know what was going on. They were there to teach about antiques, but they didn't have like good content to share for their lecture. They didn't know what to do about the mystery. Like, they didn't even really know what the mystery was. I felt like they were very meandery and didn't really know what they were doing. They were very purposeless in their time on the ship. They were like, let's see if we can find out clues to find out what's going on, because they really had no idea what was actually going on. They didn't know what to look for. And that was really frustrating as a reader to read about. It felt like the mystery itself was kind of accidental in being solved. Like, they didn't do anything to get answers because they didn't know what answers they were even looking for. I am frustrated by Arthur's notebooks that he left behind and how his elaborate machinations behind the scenes to get Freya and Carol on this cruise ship, but not giving them any resources or any understanding what's happening. It was very frustrating. And I really hope that some of these like loose ends will make more sense further on in the series. I would say that is not true for the third book though, so I think I'm just gonna be done with it. We also get introduced to a new character, Skye, who is apparently a hacker, but we don't get any details about how she's a hacker or what she's actually doing. It's more of like, here, she's a hacker and she can find this information out because she knows how to hack things. And that was it. That feels very unrealistic, and like the author knows nothing about computer hacking actually, but they do know a lot about antiques still, and we got some good details about different antiques. And Skye experiences some like intimate domestic violence, and I feel like in general Skye's character became very much a caricature, which wasn't fun to read about. There is a plot about this collector in the black market that was intriguing, and so that part of the mystery was interesting to kind of learn about, and that's why Phil was also featured in this book. But I would love to know more about this character. We don't see them in the third book though. And finally, this is probably why I dropped my rating down to a 3, because multiple times someone was found down or someone fainted or collapsed in front of other people, and everyone just stared over like, oh no, they're dead. No, check for a pulse, do CPR. No one did that, like for minutes. It was so frustrating to read about. Like, go see if they're breathing. Half the time they were breathing. They were not dead yet. So I don't know why everyone assumed that people were just dying like flies. It really bothered me. I'll talk more about the third book when I get to April's reads. But in general, I don't think I'm going to continue reading the series now that I've completed my NetGalley requirements, my commitments through NetGalley. They're okay. As far as a cozy mystery goes, I'm not a huge fan of the balance of the characters, anything like that. They're just okay. But maybe for someone else, they might be a better fit for you. I don't know. All that to say, those are my 16 reads for the month of March. Now I'm gonna splice in my footage from April so that you can hear from me on the 12 books I read in April. All right, let's jump into our April reads. The first book that I finished in April is How to Seal Your Own Fate by Kristen Perrin. This is the second book in the Castle Knoll series. I read the first book quite a while ago, kind of closer to when that one came out, and I enjoyed the mysteries in general. They have this pattern of the present day mirroring a few generations ago, and like what was happening then. So there's like 2 mysteries, parallel timeline. They're fun to read. I enjoyed this book a lot. I rated it a 4.25 star. And in retrospect, I think I would rate the first book more of like a 4.5 star because I did in general really enjoy that one too. I think just I've been reading so many mysteries lately that some of them have not held up. And this series I have really enjoyed. Definitely not perfect, but I do recommend them in general if you like the sound of the premise. In this book, now the main character is living in this estate that was owned by her, I think it was her great aunt, the character who died in the first book. And now she has inherited it. She's living there. She's kind of getting settled a little bit, but she doesn't quite feel like part of the community yet. There is a character, Penny Lane, who is the original person that gave the fortune to her great aunt of how her great aunt would die. And she has some other fortunes in mind, and she shares a fortune with this main character just before Penny Lane ends up dying. And so our main character is trying to figure out both what happens in the present day with Penny Lane and how that murder happened, and also looking back at Penny Lane's past and other fortunes that she has had her hand in, the relationships between these characters when they were in their teenage young adult years, because there's a connection there. It's really fun to kind of follow along with both of these timelines and see how they intersect. I was definitely intrigued the whole time. I really wanted to find out what was going on with the mystery the whole time. It kept my attention. I will say that in some ways, the way that the mystery worked out was a little bit convenient, but also felt a little bit convoluted. Like we didn't have really solid clues or connections made. It felt a little bit nebulous. Some of those details just felt a little bit more obscure and had a hard time totally connecting them. I feel like the plot was very interesting and I really liked the idea of the plot, but the execution was just a little bit more vague compared to the first book that had a much more tight plot. So yeah, I would definitely recommend this if you're interested in mysteries and you like the idea of the dual timelines going on in this surprisingly dark small town. I read that book in preparation for the third book that just barely came out. I have an arc for it. I've not had a chance to sit down and read it, but I'm hoping to get to it this month. The next book that I read is an arc that I loved. Totally did not see this one coming. This book is called Love is an Algorithm by Laura Brooke Robson, and I thoroughly enjoyed this. I rated it a 4.5 star. It is kind of a love story. It's more of a general fiction. It has a lot of discussion on the implications of AI. There is a solid romance subplot in there too, but it's really just following these characters as their experiences are shaped by the world around them and by the world's use of AI and their personal use of AI even. I do feel like this book could have totally gone in like a psychological horror type of direction, and I also would have loved that, but I did really enjoy this book and how the author explored these themes of AI and its use in social media, in seeking news, in our studies, in our workplace, things like that. It wasn't super heavy-handed, but it was a very prominent theme within the story where we get to see the implications of AI use throughout different experiences that these characters have and different relationships that they have and their dissatisfaction with the direction that things are going. I really like these two main characters, Eve and Danny, and I loved how sweet and tender their relationship was. I loved the banter that they had, and in general, this book felt really realistic and it was really easy to like see myself in the book, though I do feel like the characters themselves, we were a little bit removed from them. I would have loved a little bit more depth and just kind of dwelling in those characters a little bit more. I kind of think it's more of like a literary general fiction, but if you want to consider it a romance, it definitely does not follow the typical formula that you see in a lot of contemporary romances, which I really appreciated. This is a very character-driven story where you're following Eve and Danny as they end up dating, but Danny is one of the founders of an app that is using data from the people using the app to grade them on their relationship and how good their relationship is, and giving them AI suggestions on how to improve their relationship or how to work through issues in their relationship. So Danny is a founder of that. Eve is another founder's sister, and so she and Danny end up dating partway through this story, but you get to follow both of their lives individually as how they are exploring the implications of AI. Danny as he's working with AI, Eve as she is an artist, a musician, and trying to combat the effects of AI in the music space and trying to figure out where she draws the line as far as what kind of AI she uses in making her music. So really, really interesting story, and I really, really enjoyed it. This book felt really relatable for what's going on in this day and age, and just for the record, I am trying not to use any AI. I try not to look up anything on ChatGPT. I try not to encourage any AI artistry. I am trying to be anti-AI in every way personally, as well as like the way that I interact with the world. So that's my stance on it. And this book made me feel things about AI and made me a little frustrated about AI in our current day and age. There was a thread of hope throughout, and it ended on a hopeful note that we can make active choices to live more present in the world and not rely on AI, and see improvements in our relationships as a result. So there was still some hope in this story. I definitely need to find a copy of this and add it to my bookshelf. The next book that I read is I'm Not the Only Murderer in My Retirement Home by Fergus Craig. This is a nice short book. It was like maybe six and a half hours to listen to, and I had seen Bethany of Woolbury Fiber Co. was reading this, and I saw that the cover had some knitting on it. I thought this would be so fun, and so I decided to read this book for my Discord book club. I am trying to figure out how to revive it because I'm not getting a lot of engagement over there, so I might try to switch things up for a different format of book club to kind of open up to people not in my Discord. I'm trying to see what to do about that. Maybe I'll do a Storygraph buddy read or something. I'm not sure. But that's why I read this book, and I enjoyed it. I rated it a 3.5 star. I'm going to talk more about this over on Discord, so if you're interested in reading this book and seeing if it is a good fit for you, then make sure to check out my link for my book club down below. It's in the same category of like subgenre as the Thursday Murder Club, which I love, and you'll see me talk about later. But this book involves some British pensioners who live in a retirement home and are having a blast being amateur detectives and meddling in the police's business when a murder happens in their midst. Sounds very familiar, and it's actually kind of becoming a more common subgenre in cozy mysteries. So if you like that, I would definitely recommend this. I feel like this book is a good example of the subgenre, though I didn't like it as much as Thursday Murder Club, of course. I didn't connect with the characters as much. For the most part, they're kind of forgettable, except the one main character, who is a former serial killer, Carol. She stands out in my brain, and she was very distinct. I really, really liked her, and I liked seeing the nuance of her character. I loved seeing her motivations and flashbacks for her crimes that she committed, and it was very satisfying. The kinds of men that she chose to off because they were being bigots or they were being rude or, you know, whatnot. It was very much like getting rid of the alpha males. And so that was really fun. I like the sense of justice in that. But this group is not very cohesive as far as all these characters go, because there's a lot of distrust for Carol because she moves into the retirement home and now there's a murder. And so there's just a lot of back and forth of, do we trust her? Do we not? And it felt like all the different members of this little group had different goals in mind. I don't think this is gonna be a series, but it kind of felt like it was written as like an introduction to this group, because by the end, you know, they learn to trust each other, they learn more about each other, etc., etc. But I just wasn't fully engaged in the group dynamics because of how they were written. I also was hoping for a little bit more knitting in this story because there's knitting on the cover, but I think it's just the stereotype of old people knitting, which is a little bit of a bummer. So this is a decent book. not a favorite. The next book that I read was one of my favorites this month, and this is A Murderous Relation by Deanna Rayborn. This is book 5 in the Veronica Speedwell series, and the last book, 4, was my favorite. 5 stars, loved it. This book I rated a 4.5 star. I still really enjoyed it, as I've enjoyed the rest of the series. This book, Veronica and Stoker's romantic tension has really hit like a peak, but it doesn't really ebb and flow. There's no give and take. It doesn't really build for the majority of the story. And so that makes it feel a little bit stagnant as far as that part of the story. Though finally, at the end, they get to have some romantic private time together, closed door situation. So glad that that finally happened. Not sure where this relationship is going to go for the rest of the series because there are now 10 books out and this is only book 5. So we will see. But in general, I really liked the plot and where this story was going. This is a historical novel, if you're not familiar. It takes place in the 1880s and there's this promiscuous club and Veronica and Stoker are trying to find a piece of jewelry that the Prince Albert, has given to this madame and trying to make sure that he doesn't get implicated in participating in this club that she owns. So you're following along as they are exploring this club, as they're meeting these interesting characters, as they end up getting kidnapped, as they meet Prince Albert, and he and Veronica get to have a familial relationship. And it's really interesting to see kind of how these characters change and grow and interact with one another. It also involves little inkling of Jack the Ripper as kind of like a subplot of what's going on in the community around them. And that was really interesting as well and makes me want to read more historical fiction or more historical nonfiction about Jack the Ripper because I don't know a lot about it. And this sprinkled it in a great way that makes me interested in reading more. And I just have to share this quote that really made my heart just sigh. Oh my goodness. Stoker is talking to Veronica and he says, "I suppose I must surrender to my fate because you are clearly destined for adventure and I am destined for you." So sweet. I love this series. It's a nice, comfortable series that I love coming back to every once in a while to just continue on because it's so long. I need to purchase the next book in the series so I can keep reading them. Gonna pause there. I'm making do with the time I have, unfortunately. We'll come back to this and finish talking about April in a little bit. I gotta get my daughter from preschool. We are back with another nap time. We'll see how long it lasts. 15 minutes or 2 hours. Who knows? I've got my cat here with me as well. The next book that I want to talk about that I read in April is The Summer of Second Chances by K.L. Walther. And this was an arc that I had the opportunity to read. And I have read by this author before. It's been kind of hit or miss with this author as far as like YA romances go. This one wasn't quite a hit, but it wasn't my least favorite by this author either. I rated this book a 3.5 star. I will say that the setting of Martha's Vineyard was stunning. Like the summer vibes were immaculate. Definitely love it for that. And then the premise where this girl, Olivia, is trying to come to terms with her favorite person, her grandmother, Annie, developing dementia, and that is progressing. And so her grandmother is now in a care home, and sometimes she doesn't even recognize Olivia. It's really hard for her. And so she's trying to be there for every last good moment that Annie has because she cares about her so much. But she really needs some space, and she's only 19. I think she's just 1 year after graduating high school. So she needs a chance to still be a teenager and to look forward to her own life too. So it's kind of a hard balance. She ends up going to Martha's Vineyard on vacation with her family as ways to kind of separate herself from what's going on with her grandmother and to kind of find herself again and discover her own identity separate from her grandma. So I really enjoyed that premise as well, and I loved how realistic the representation of someone with dementia is in this book. I worked at a memory care facility before. I'm a nurse. I have some exposure to that, and so I really appreciated the realistic nature of that part of the story. I didn't particularly care for Olivia, and I had some issues with her relationship too. So she meets this guy, Connor, while she's in Martha's Vineyard. He's like nannying some of the cousins in this big extended family group kind of thing. I really like how they get to know each other, and I really like their friendship and how they spend time together that way. But this romance felt really emotionally stunted, which ends up being kind of an issue later on in the book. It's a conflict that arises, but also the relationship gets pretty serious pretty fast, but lacks a lot of the emotional maturity that should be present when a relationship gets that serious. So that was not like my favorite blend of how that relationship was written, though I liked the basis and the friendship of it. I just didn't like where it went. I also wasn't a particular fan of Olivia. She just was not my kind of person. If we had known each other at that age, I don't think we would have been friends. We wouldn't have gotten along well. I don't have a big problem with her, but I just feel like as a character, the way that she handled her struggles was not something I could identify with at all. And so I had a hard time relating to her, but that was more of like a personal thing. I think that some people could really like this character. I found her very realistic though. And so I will give the author that. Just personally for me, she wasn't like a great fit as a protagonist for me and what I wanted to read. Also, if you read other books by this author, there were mentions of other characters in Martha's Vineyard from other books of hers, which was kind of fun, but I feel like this book had just way too many characters that were just in this book because there was this big extended family going on. And then there was also all these other characters that were like friends or acquaintances or shop people in Martha's Vineyard that were seen in other books. So there was just way too many people to keep track of. And I feel like that wasn't done well as far as like Easter eggs go, because there was just too much, especially in this extended family. Like there was only like 3 siblings. There was like the grandparents, the 3 siblings and their families, but somehow that still got really hard to keep track of, just the way that it was written. So I would recommend this for the summer vibes. If you like a YA romance that handles a little bit deeper topics as people are aging out of YA, becoming more new adult, I feel like you could like this. For me, it was just all right. The next book that I read was Richard Osman's The Impossible Fortune, and this is number 5 in the Thursday Murder Club series. I do want to reread because it's been a while since I read the first few. In general, I really love this band of characters. I love how distinct and impressionable they are. I love their interactions and how you wouldn't necessarily put all of these people together in a friend group, and yet they play off of each other so well and they really seem to fit together. I really love the wit and the humor that you see in this series, and I also appreciate the mystery and how well crafted oftentimes the mystery is by this author. I will say that this book felt less of a mystery and more of like a character study. It felt like in the 4th book there was some grief and hard times, and this book the characters are just kind of recovering from that, and so there was kind of an air of melancholy. There was a little bit of like a slower pace in the characters' internal motivations. I feel like this book mostly focused on them individually and in their relationships rather than on the mystery. The mystery felt like it took a back seat to other things going on in this story a little bit. The mystery though was really interesting. It involved Bitcoin and cold storage of data. So there are 2 people that own this cold storage for data. So basically like a bunker that you can store data and important electronic things on, like actual hard drives and whatnot, and then store those hard drives in this bunker kind of idea, if I understand correctly. And they had access to Bitcoin that had just been growing and growing in value. So they had this code to the Bitcoin that was locked away in their cold storage. One of the characters goes missing, maybe is dead. One of the other characters, something happens to them. And so they're trying to find out, how can we get into this locked area of the bunker to get that Bitcoin information to hopefully end the drama related to this financial boon, right? So that was a really interesting part of the story to follow along with. And I also really appreciated a couple of the storylines that the individual characters had. I really, really loved seeing Elizabeth as she was recovering from losing her husband, and kind of as she was reevaluating her life and what mattered to her and how she wanted to invest herself. It wasn't like a total 180 of changing her mind and deciding that, I do want to keep doing this kind of thing. It was a very slow and gradual, very realistic growth that we see in her character as she is looking towards the future, which I loved. And then I also loved Joyce her character and her relationship with her daughter Joanna and how that changed over the course of this book, and you get to see some good growth in Joyce's character as well. I loved how all the family and personal problems, relationship struggles that were addressed in this book all were kind of connected and wrapped up together in the end of this book. It was well crafted in that sense. It felt like it all fit together really well. It was very satisfying in how they were resolved. So this is not my favorite Thursday Murder Club book, but it was still a good installment. And because I know these characters really well, since this is the 5th book, so it was okay that it was more of a character study and a little bit less about the mystery plot, though the mystery plot was still a significant part of this book and how these characters got to where they were going. I don't know if I mentioned 4.75 stars. This next book is one that I read in preparation for another arc that I have, and the 3rd book in the series actually just came out. So I'm excited to get to that arc and be able to talk about that hopefully in the next episode of this reading wrap-up series. This is Dating and Dragons by Christy Boyce, and this series is a YA romance series that focuses on characters that play Dungeons and Dragons and other nerdy hobbies, which is awesome. I love it. It is just so fun and original and relatable. So I've really enjoyed this series so far. And this book is no exception. I rated this a 4.25 star. In this book, Quinn is in a new school. She's feeling lonely. She had some troubles with her friend group, aka her D&D group, in her last school, and she's trying to get a fresh start. She meets some people that are part of a D&D group, and they invite her to join. Come to find out that they stream their sessions, and they don't get very many views, but they love what they do, and they're hoping for some growth in their streaming channel. And so she's having fun joining their group. She has had some hot and cold feelings about one of the members of this friend group, Logan. He was very friendly with her when they first met, but when she joined their D&D group, he started being very, honestly, rude to her, which I did not like. And so there was some conflict between them, and she was trying to get to the bottom of it. Like, is he trying to put up a front because they have this rule in their Dungeons and Dragons group that they're not allowed to date anyone in the group? Or does he have some other problem with her kind of thing? So there's like a will they, won't they from our perspective. Like, are they going to break the rule of no dating in this D&D group, or are they going to stay apart from one another and try to keep it just friends? You also see some drama from her previous friends and how that kind of plays into how she got where she is now. There's also a couple family things as she's trying to define her relationship with her brother, and she's trying to be a good support for her grandma who is aging. So I really, really like the blend of this story and all the different facets and how they build together to create this situation and this main character. I really, really liked Quinn as the main character, and I appreciated how realistic all of these struggles were. I think that if you are a teenager or you really like YA books, that this is a really great example of a well-written YA romance. I will say though, the romance wasn't perfect for me. Like I mentioned already, I hated that Logan was very hot and cold towards Quinn when he could have, if the dating rule was an issue, he could have just been very like standoffish and very shy around her rather than being actively rude and being like, you don't belong in our group kind of thing. Like, he was kind of a bully, honestly, at the very beginning, which I really didn't like. I also felt like their relationship in general was a little bit insta-lovey. And this is funny because the emotion of their relationship got really, really deep, but didn't have a lot of substance to define how deep they felt for one another. It felt a little bit incongruous, if that makes sense. It didn't get super physical or anything. It just felt a little bit too serious for like the amount of time they spent together and the types of interactions that they had. I wanted it to be a little bit more subtle, a little bit more of a slow burn as far as their relationship and their commitment to one another went. Another arc that I read this month was Thinky Thoughts by Gwenna Lathlan. I read her first book not too long ago, whenever she came out with that, so maybe that was a couple years ago now. But this book is another nonfiction written by her. It's kind of like an essay collection. It's a little bit nebulous as far as like the purpose of it, so that's why it's a little hard to define, but it's basically an essay collection that she shares her experiences and things that she has learned, what that means for her in her identity beyond being a parent. So some of those stories are stories of her being a parent, but then how that defines who she is outside of parenthood. Some of these stories involve her own parents and what she's learned from them and how she wants to move forward with her life beyond that. So it's kind of an interesting premise. And I really liked this book. I really like Gwenna's mannerisms and how she interacts with people. She is Mama Cusses online, and that's how I originally found her and found out about her first book and now the second book. And she did narrate the second book as well, which I think is totally the way to go. It just doesn't come alive as much if you're reading the words than if you're listening to her voice reading them to you. If you're looking for her signature style, irreverent and funny, and also sometimes heartwarming and also sometimes heartbreaking, then I feel like you would really enjoy these stories. I really want to add this into my collection. I got the audiobook arc and I want this on my shelves with her other book, and I want to look through at the different stories that were most meaningful to me. One thing that really stood out to me, she talks about something called the bean theory, where everyone has beans, and doing certain activities with other people means you either give them your beans or you take beans in return. And that was such a powerful way to describe introverted versus extroverted, because being with some people gives you beans, but also being with other people uses up your beans, and maybe certain people use certain kinds of beans and others use different kinds of beans. And so it was a more dynamic way to talk about being introverted versus extroverted and how that looks like in practice. So I really appreciated that perspective that she shared in one of her stories. I do feel like, and she mentions this, there's a little bit of emotional whiplash because you get some funny and lighthearted stories, and then immediately after that you hear about how her father abandoned her or her difficult marriage, things like that is how it was written. Gwen acknowledges that, but I do feel like that took away a little bit from the overall message of the story, the overall message of this essay collection. I think that if you really enjoy this content creator, you would love reading her second book. I think if you are not familiar with her, but you don't mind a little bit of irreverent humor and telling it like it is when it comes to parenting, but also looking beyond parenting, I think you also might enjoy this. Her tone might not be for everybody, and the premise of what she's doing with this book might not be for everybody. I think in general, most people would enjoy this essay collection. The Big Boy. This was the longest book I read, and actually, I think it's the longest book I've ever read because it's over 1,000 pages. And this took forever. This is The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. I have a goal to read through the Cosmere because I only recently, within the past couple years, have been made aware of Brandon Sanderson and how he might be a good fit for me. I read Tress of the Emerald Sea right after that came out, and I love that book. And I was like, wow, I actually really like this writing style. Let me find more stuff by him. And I have read the original Mistborn trilogy. I've read Warbreaker. Now I'm on to The Way of Kings. All these books are massive, unfortunately for me. Well, okay, I don't know how long it would take to read this physically because I just don't have the mental bandwidth to do that when I have the time to sit down and read a book. But the audiobook was like 45 hours or something crazy like that. So I purchased a copy so I didn't have to worry about returning it to my library or like trying to get it done in the maximum amount of time allotted to me by my library. But I've been working on this kind of slowly for the first few months of the year. And then this month I was like, I'm going to finish this. I'm like halfway through. We're just going to power through. And I did. And I really enjoyed it. I will say, I'm getting tired holding this book up. I will say that I really love the story. I love the depth. I have questions about the world. You kind of feel like you're dropped in and you're observing the world and taking in details slowly over time rather than having like exposition at the beginning of the story telling you exactly what all the lore is behind what you're seeing. And so it's a little bit slower of a start. I do feel like the plots in general were also a little bit slow at the start of this book, but the second half of the book definitely flew by and I was already invested. It was just a little bit slower getting into it, I feel like. I do really love Shallan and the complexity of her character, and I'm really excited to see where her character goes in the coming books. I loved how there were some really interesting twists of understanding that give us more information about this world at large, but they were also unexpected for the people learning about them in this book too. So it's not like the narrator was trying to hide information from us. It was something that was also new for the characters to learn. So I really, really enjoyed this book. I rated it a 4.5 star. It was just too long and slow for the first half of it. That made it really hard to get into and to remember everything because there's just so many details. So I'm really excited about continuing on in this series and reading the second book, and I hope that the momentum from the end of the first book carries into the second book. And I've heard only good things about the series, so I'm really excited to continue to work my way through it, hopefully at a slightly faster pace than I read this book, but I really don't know because I think this was the shortest book in the series. But if you have read, what is the series called? If you have read the Stormlight Archives, let me know which of the books is your favorite. I think there's maybe 5 books out right now. I've got a little ways to go. I have a lot of Brandon Sanderson books to catch up on, and he is just putting out too much content right now. Like, I can't keep up with the amount of books that he's writing, so I need to pick up the pace if I ever want to have a hope of catching up. The next book that I read in April was The Poppy Fields by Nikki Erlich. I loved her debut, The Measure, and that is another speculative fiction that just made me really think about myself and my values and what I would do in that given situation. And this book has similar feelings. It promises a similar premise, but it doesn't quite deliver to the extent that The Measure did for me personally. I rated this a 4-star though. I still enjoyed this. In this book, you are following a handful of different characters and their relationship with the poppy fields, which is, I guess, kind of a center for sleeping. They will put you to sleep medically if you are grieving the loss of someone in your life. And you'll wake up in 1 to 2 months and you will not feel the same way emotionally. Your grief will be maybe dampened is a good way to talk about it. You will not feel quite so heartbroken, but 1 in 4 people who choose to do the sleep wake up and they don't have any emotions about that person that they lost. So it's kind of like an empty shell of a relationship, which is maybe or maybe not worth it for some people who have lost someone that they care about so deeply. So this book talks a lot about grief and loss and whether it's better to try to, sleep through it or whether it's better to live through the ups and downs of that grief experience. I like that there was a few different people that we followed, different experiences, whether they wanted to or didn't want to sleep. I liked how some of the people's, original impressions on what choice they would make in this circumstance changed throughout the book, so that was interesting. I really loved that one of the perspectives was the founder of the poppy fields, and we got to understand why she came up with this science and why she made this center, that it wasn't for making money and it wasn't like this big evil conglomerate of, putting people to sleep, but there is a lot of compassion with her decision to run this center and trying to help people sleep through their grief and come out the other side being able to function a little bit more without someone who mattered so much to them. So I really loved getting that perspective from that character. I just found that this book in general was less provocative. It was less deep than The Measure was. It didn't make me look towards myself as much as The Measure did. I think maybe if I was experiencing the loss of someone meaningful to me in the near past, that I would have connected more with this book. But I don't know, it just felt like it was missing a little something as far as like the oomph. I also feel like the messaging wasn't as varied and nuanced as it was in The Measure. So it was good, but it wasn't great. And I think I read somewhere, maybe on Reddit, that this was actually written before The Measure was. So this is younger writing than The Measure. So I'm really interested to see what this author comes out with in the future as a more well-crafted book, as a newer book with, better writing, if that's the way I want to talk about it. I don't know. This wasn't badly written by all means, but you know how the author's writing style will grow and improve over time. I'm looking forward to future books by this author, if indeed this was written before The Measure, because I loved The Measure. We're almost done talking about April. This is System Collapse by Martha Wells, and this is number 7 in the Murderbot Diaries, which I've loved. They just bring me so much joy. I really love the humanity of Murderbot, their sarcasm, and it's just so funny and so relatable in an antisocial bot kind of way. And I really love seeing Murderbot's growth over time as they are interacting with the humans around them and building relationships as well. I do kind of want to reread the series, but read everything closer to back. I've kind of spread out the series because I've loved them so much. I kind of don't want them to end, but that makes it hard in between books to remember who some of the side characters are and to kind of keep track of everything sequentially between the books. But I did get the arc for Platform Decay, which just came out, and I'm like halfway through the arc, so hopefully it'll only be another couple days of reading, and then I will be all caught up on that one. I was doing so great, and then this month I've fallen behind on my advanced reader copies, unfortunately. That's a goal for me for May, to get caught up with my deadlines and to be caught up with my book releases for the month of May. So you are following Murderbot and some of their friends as they are on a newly colonized planet trying to find anything of worth that they don't want the evil corporation of, what's it called, Barish Estranza, to get a hold of. And they end up finding some colonists that they hadn't interacted with before. So they're trying to convince the colonists that Barish Estranza is actually evil and is going to put them into indentured servitude. And so this group feels a lot of responsibility for helping the colonists to see the truth of this evil corporation and helping them to make the choice for themselves to be safe in their colony environment. I will say that the beginning of this book, it was kind of hard to get into. It was a little hard to understand what was going on because Murderbot was redacting a little bit of like, oh, there was this one circumstance that happened, redacted, and it wouldn't tell you what that was. But after a little while, Murderbot opened up about what that redacted circumstance was, and things started making more sense. So I think that was partially on purpose, but it did make it a little hard to get into. I also really liked the emotional trauma that Murderbot was working through as a result of that experience and how that reflected on their behavior and their productivity in this book. And I feel like that has some lessons for us in our humanity as well. So I rated this a 4.5 star. Again, a little hard to get into, but I still really appreciated it. But I still really love Murderbot. The last book that I read in April was The Antique Hunter's Murder at the Castle, and this book is by C.L. Miller. And this is the third book in the series. I read the first 3 books because they were all read now on NetGalley, and I had been intrigued by the series. I really should have just requested the first one and read it and decided, I don't love this. Is this worth my time? I'm not sure. I don't think I'm going to continue in this series. They're just okay for me. They're not a favorite. I rated this book specifically 3.5 stars. And in this book, Bella is helping out our antique hunters, and she goes missing when she is going to a castle up in Scotland. So the antique hunters, Freya and Carol, travel up to Scotland, and other people end up meeting them. So you've got like the whole crew. Skye comes up later on, Phil comes up later on, and they are trying to find Bella, and they are trying to solve a murder that they find took place at the castle as well, to try to make sure that Bella isn't implicated in that murder. This book felt a lot more focused on the mystery aspect of the story, of them breaking into a locked home or searching for clues, talking to people to kind of get more information about what's going on and piecing things together. It felt more mystery focused and a little bit less about the antiques, which is unfortunate because I feel like what makes this series different is how much information there is about the antiques themselves that makes you feel like you really know what's going on with these artifacts. And we just didn't have that much detail in the antique realm in this book. I also was kind of bothered by these characters. It was just kind of frustrating to read about. It felt very cozy mystery in that like the conflicts were a little bit fabricated for the reader rather than true conflict that would arise in a circumstance like this. So I was frustrated that Phil even showed up. He's CIA, FBI? I think he's FBI. He's FBI. Why is he in Scotland helping Freya? He has nothing to do with this. Why was Bella not communicating with the rest of people on her team? Why is Skye a hacker and yet we get zero details about how she's hacking to get these clues. It's just like, oh, she's a computer person. She can hack and find that out. And she's like, oh yeah, I just found that information out by hacking online. So this isn't my favorite for sure. I also am still kind of frustrated with Arthur's convoluted messaging that he leaves behind for the antique hunters, for Carol and Freya. Maybe I shouldn't rate this a 3.5. Maybe it's lower than that, because there was a lot of things that just kind of bothered me, and they've bothered me kind of this whole series, and they haven't improved. Like, Arthur died, he left behind some clues, but they keep talking about how he's got 7 notebooks of these different artifacts written down and clues included. They're very obscure, they're very convoluted, and it just feels like too much of a stretch, and these clues don't fit together super well for me. I feel like a lot of the assumptions made don't quite follow through appropriately on the clues that we are given, and the logic is like not quite there. So maybe I should rate it less than 3.5. I put it in as a 3.5 because I still enjoyed the story in general and figuring out what was happening. There you have it. Everything that I read in March and April of this year, 28 books, that is a lot, and I'm hoping to get back onto a better schedule with this series of wrap-ups because I do really love sharing what I've read with you. If you have read any of these books or are interested in reading any of these books, have them on your TBR, let me know down below. And if you have any recommendations for me, let me know as well. I always love to hear from you, the books that you would recommend and the books that you are loving. And if you like this type of content and want to see more from me in the realm of reading and knitting and other kinds of cozy things, then make sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification down below to be notified every time I post a new video, because I post pretty regularly but not on a consistent schedule at all. As you can see, I am working around my kids and I am doing the best I can to come up with content for you. So if you want to see anything in particular from me, any specific reading vlogs or reading and knitting combo vlogs, let me know down below as well. Thank you so much again for being here, and I hope to see you again very soon for another video. Until next time, happy reading. Bye!